Hello YouTube, D-Deckin here, and a few days ago, the Yugioh organization website posted an article talking about the new cards, new vampire support, and their card effects that are coming out in set Dark Saviors, which is set to release around May 24th, May 25th. So, as I was reading through the effects, the first question that kind of popped in my head was, can I use these cards in Vendread? Or rather, could I make a small vampire engine that could work in Vendread? Which, as you can probably tell, I'm a little obsessed with Vendread right now. I really love the aesthetic of the aspect, the combo plays and aesthetic of Vendread, along with ritual summoning and how you can link spam with the deck. There's a lot of options, a lot of versatility that the archetype has that I really do like. But at the same time, I do have to acknowledge that there is a lot of generic general support in terms of zombies and rituals that Vendread also has access to. So the idea of giving them more support seems a bit ridiculous, or even just an engine in the deck already, a second engine along with the Vendread engine in general, and it's mind-boggling, but it's something I want to think about, because it can become relevant in conversations, and depending on how you want to play the deck, or depending on how you want to use certain cards, it does generate ideas and plays. So that's what I kind of want to do with this video. This video is a discussion video. I want to talk about the possibility of it. If it is impossible, then that's fine, but just the idea behind it nonetheless. That said, before I actually start talking about some of the cards, I do want to bring up two things first. First, it's the themes of the monsters. And the monsters generally have two themes running through them. The major theme is the fact that vampires are known to suck the life from their victims. So a lot of the vampire effects have effects where you have to pay life points, to which that can kind of get annoying, but there are ways to go about it. In recent history, Cosmo played around with paying life points, and like I said, it can be kind of hit or miss, but I do like the aesthetic of it. And the second aspect is taking an opponent's monster in order to, like vampires hypnotize their prey, you take control of their monsters, which follows along with the Exceed monster that came out a while back, Alf Dathomir, which, when I first saw it, this was before we got Battlelord, but when I first saw this, I thought it was an okay option to go into when you make a dead Slayer. But at the same time, you also lose the aspect of Slayer's second effect, where you search a ritual spell and you send a monster, which is very vital. But if you run out of ritual spells, then I guess I always thought it was an option you could make instead of if you can't always make the Link Slayer play. But that said, going into some of the monsters first, out of the 6 cards, which I'll leave a link to the YG organization article in the description, but there are 6 of the 10 cards that I'm actually a little bit more interested in for just an engine alone. In terms of monsters, there are 3. In terms of spell and trap cards, there's also 3. It's, like I said, a little bit simple. 2 of the 3 monsters I want to first talk about is Familiar and Brood. Now, both of them have effects for whenever they're special summoned, but they also have effects that let them special summon themselves in the graveyard, which generally is what prompted me to first think about Vendread, because Vendread does the same thing. They summon themselves from the graveyard and then they banish themselves. Well, Familiar and Brood do the same thing, except you have to send a vampire card from your hand to the graveyard in order to trigger it. But at the same time, they both have summon effects, which is something that Vendread doesn't have. So I thought it'd be a great way to start thinning or searching the deck. Familiar's effect lets you pay 500 to search a vampire monster, whereas Brood pays 500 to search a spell trap card. In terms of how many to run them, I can probably see Familiar run at 1 and Brood run at 2. And the reason I suggest those numbers is because if you do incorporate them into Vendread has a little bit more difficult time when you just have lower levels and a higher ritual monster. It becomes more difficult to play it at that point because you can't ritual summon a monster that you may need. So I run those at lower. So it's definitely more difficult at level 1 versus level 2. With level 2, if you have Chimera, you can easily go into. Yeah, it makes it a little bit more difficult to talk about. Then there's also the level 5 Vampire Fräulein, which again completely justifies the life point cost, because her attack may be 600 and defense may be 2000, but once per battle you can just, well, once per turn I guess, you can just pay up to 3,000 life points, and she gains attack and defense up to that amount, which either makes her an incredibly high defense blocker, or she can put extra pressure if you summon her in attack mode, which means any monster below 3,600 can't run over her. Not to mention, if they do try to run over her and you just pay the life points, she just steals the opponent's monster. Which, again, if you want to play Alf Dathomir, that is an option. She's level 5, not to mention she's also level 5, which, again, going back to the argument of level 1 and level 2 being too low for ritual summoning, level 5 pretty much takes up most of the ritual summon, so you only need a Chimera on the field, or you need literally almost anything else just to bring out Slayer or Battle Lord, depending on what you want to run. So, yeah, in terms of monsters, I'd probably run her about 2 or 3. So that's about 5 or 6 monsters for just the Vampire engine alone, which doesn't seem like a lot, but by having the small monster count, you also keep them more in the deck, which also then moves on to the spell and trap cards. And the first spell card, Vampire Desire, a normal spell card, actually has a lot of promise in terms of comboing with Vendread. Again, I've talked about how having too low of levels or not having a high enough level when you want to ritual summon with not many monsters can be a bit difficult. But one of Desire's effects is lets you send a vampire from your deck to the graveyard to change the level of one monster you control. Which, if you send Familiar to set it up for its summon to play later, you can change one monster to level 1, or if you send Fräulein, which if you're running 3, you might always have access to her in the deck, but if you send Fräulein, you can turn a level 1 or level 2 monster into a level 5, which takes up most of the ritual requirement. Which seems very nice, but it also has a second effect where you can either do that, or you can send a monster to revive a vampire from the graveyard, which, yes, can go along with a Familiar and Broad's effect, but once again, Vampire Sucker is also an option you can make, and depending on if you can get it off first turn or not, you basically then are reviving a Link 2 from your graveyard, which can help and extend your Link plays and let you summon higher Link monsters right away. So, like I said, Vampire Desire has a lot of promise. I'd probably run it about 2, just because it does require you to have a monster at all times, whether it's in the graveyard or on the field. But it does also thin your deck. It can thin your deck, or it can set up plays. So, like I said, it does have some versatility, but it's not. But you don't want to necessarily always see it, but it does have a lot of promise. Then there's the trap Vampire Awaken, which, if anyone's ever played Dynamis, they know the trap Dynamis Rush, which basically just let them summon a Dynamis from the deck, even though it destroys itself. That's basically what this is. You summon a vampire from the deck, and then it destroys itself during the end phase. Which, if you summon it on the opponent's turn, you can summon Familiar Broad to get a free search. Or you could even just summon out Fräulein for a free defense, for a defensive play. But at the exact same time, if you summon it on your turn, not only are you getting that search on your turn, but you also immediately set a monster out for Link plays, or you can just ritual summon right away into a monster because you already have the monsters on the field. It's, like I said, I like cards like that just give you a free monster and give you some versatility and workaround from what you're trying to do. It's very fun. They're very fun cards. I would definitely recommend 3, but I can also see 2. The reason I say 3 is because, again, I'm recommending a low monster count, which means you almost always have this live, and if you get it first turn, it's even more helpful. But if you dead draw it late game, if you have Familiar Broad already in the graveyard, you can just pitch it. You don't have to set it. You can just pitch it from your hand and just be able to revive them, and then it still has worth, despite you might getting it on a time you might want to see it. Not to mention, it's something you can immediately search off with Broad if you special summon Broad right away. So like I said, I recommend about 3 or 2 copies. If you want to run 2 copies, that's fine. If you want to run 3 just to max out on it, that's also possible. And the last card, of course, is Vampire Domination, a literal counter trap card. That's it. That's basically what it is. It's a counter trap card, which if you stick that in Vendread, it gives them one more out to something the opponent does, which, in my honesty, something I didn't like about Vendread is you can probably summon a big beefy monster on the first turn, but at the same time, if your opponent has a kaiju or something, Vendread going first is never an optimal play. You generally want to go second so you can either counter your opponent or do something else, or just The first turn play in Vendread was never something viable, but if you go first and you open Domination, you basically have a counter trap already live in the field. And what makes this even better is that even though it requires you to have a vampire in your field, again, if you can summon Vampire Sucker, which if you're already able to do that with your regular Vendread plays, you could just leave Vampire Sucker on the field and have that be your first turn. Despite that not being optimal, that's still having first turn's Vampire Sucker and then just leaving on the field just to counter an opponent's play, that's very helpful. So, counting that up, that's about 6 monsters, 5 or 6 monsters, or 7 or 8 spell trap, which is about 12 or 14 cards. You might be able to cut 1 or 2 extra things that I'm recommending out, just in place from other things, but let's say 12 to 14 card engine in just Vendreads. I was actually trying to think about how to use Vendreads in Vampires, but I'm not completely familiar enough with these card effects to talk about that, so I might make that a separate video, but what do you think? Do you think this 12 to 14 card engine idea I have stupid, or are you more interested in the vampire cards now than you were before? Just let me know in the comments below, and, well, have a good day.